Hey everybody, we are now live discussing Paper Mario. So, thank you so much for joining us, whether you're watching the archived version on YouTube or live with us now on, oh god, that's showing up. Thank you for joining us. Everyone's playing Cyberpunk. Time to close Steam. Hold on, I will fix that. Oh, professional streamer right here. So good. So good. So yeah, I am currently going to be discussing the wonderful, wonderful Paper Mario series, particularly Paper Mario Nintendo 64 and Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. And with me, I have a special guest, a good friend of mine. I am joined by Kevin, who is a self-acclaimed Nintendo 64 apologist and Paper Mario fanboy.
I, I I wouldn't say that. Paper Mario fanboy, I'll take. N64 apologist, I don't know about that.
Well, someone's got to apologize for it.
You could do GameCube. I'll take the reins for GameCube, but
I think GameCube's like generally well liked. So Kevin, before we formally begin, I know I got Mario 64 gameplay going in the background, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. Is there anything you kind of want to shout out or bring up to the audience to sort of intro yourself, or anything I may have missed?
not really. I used to do YouTube shit back a while ago, but I'm more focused on my career now. I'm a game designer, I guess. So
Yeah.
I don't. That doesn't mean my opinions hold any more weight than anybody else's.
I mean, they hold
But
so much more weight. This is the internet, Kevin. Take a stance.
yeah, but no, not really.
All right, fair enough. I mean, back in the day, Kevin and I did a lot of collaborations. We did a Pokemon White. Is it White version or Black version? I think it was Black version.
I'd have to look it up, but yeah, we didn't as luck on that. Got destroyed by final boss dude and his Hydreigon.
Yeah, that thing's fucking broken. We got utterly stomped by that. But I'm very excited because Kevin and I have had a lot of private discourse about Paper Mario and how the series has changed. So for this particular episode, normally these past gaming pilgrimage, wow, pilgrimage, it's a weird word. These past gaming pilgrimage episodes have been about one game in particular of a series. And this one, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to be discussing Paper Mario 64 and the sequel, Thousand Year Door, because in my mind, they kind of blend together a bit. They're very distinct, especially Thousand Year Door. But the conversation, are especially in today, which is a pretty volatile discourse on the internet about Paper Mario. People really love these first two games, and then it seems like all the other games are kind of bundled together as this crazy heap, which I don't think we feel a bit differently about that, but we definitely agree that like the more recent entries are kind of weak sauce in comparison to these first two games.
Yeah, I don't think Super Paper Mario gets bundled up. I will say anything past that does.
I think there's been a resurgence of love for Super Paper Mario. Initially, there was like a lot of backlash because it was so different stylistically in terms of gameplay and whatnot. But I think maybe Sticker Star made people go, you know what? It was actually pretty good.
Well, Sticker Star would make most things look good.
Yeah, oof, that's true. That's true.
Spoilers for later.
Yeah, so I will say we're probably going to discuss, it's going to be, I don't think we're going to get into too many crazy specifics. We might, but we're going to be having an open conversation about both games. So if you've never played either of these games, I mean, Paper Mario 64, I wouldn't be too concerned about spoilers because the story is not like the main driving force. It's more like the world and how wacky everything is, whereas Thousand Year Door actually has surprisingly good writing, and so that's the one I'd caution more of about spoilers. If you're really interested in playing either of these games, go check them out if you are concerned about that. Otherwise, be warned, because we're going to get into some specifics and details that may go into like the late games of those stories and sequences. So, Kevin, let's begin by discussing Paper Mario 64. And I'm just going to, from this point on, I'm just going to call it Paper Mario because I hate specifying it.
Yeah. I mean, you only really have to because of hindsight at this point.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Like, what a weird game. Made by Intelligent Systems, who are primarily known for Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, but these days pretty much only Fire Emblem. And this series...
Advance Wars.
Pardon?
Oof. I said don't even mention Advance Wars anymore. I
Yeah,
can't. I think we're buried,
yeah.
and it won't be coming back. I doubt.
It's weird because that series had such a boom.
Yeah,
Because that's like the reason we got Fire Emblem. It's because
I
Advance
think
Wars
it was
did so
big.
well.
Yeah, it was bigger than Fire Emblem for a long time.
Yeah, I mean,
I,
there was what, 2 GBA games and 3 DS games? Or just 2 DS
uh,
games? Just 2 and 2?
maybe two. I'm not sure.
Because there's like
But
the edgy one, Days of Ruin, which was
yes,
the
that
last one.
was the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sketchy. But anyway, Paper Mario. Where do you want to sort of start with this one? Do you want to do like overall thoughts?
Sure. So that you can like dive into mechanics if you want, or
I think
like
mechanics will come up because we're gonna be doing a bit of a I imagine we're gonna be comparing these two because it's only inevitable because it's a direct because Thousand Year Door is a direct sequel. But I think general, and then we'll probably get into more nitty gritty as we go on.
sounds good.
So what are your general thoughts? Because I think this is one of those games that back in the day, I was jealous of my friends who had an N64 because they could play Paper Mario. Because I remember at like the McDonald's that had the N64 stations, I would always play up to the point where you see the Goomba King, and then I would have to go because my mom got our Happy Meals and stuff.
I have a shit ton of stories about Paper Mario 64. I think so. I was a Nintendo kid up till the 360 came out. My first console was the SNES, and I mostly played like A Link to the Past and Super Mario World. Like, I'm trying to remember if there was any mobile before it, but I think it might be the first RPG I played.
Yeah, I
Um,
could see that.
yeah, yeah, because there wasn't really a lot of other RPGs and Nintendo stuff.
Well,
I
you and I
didn't
are
play,
both '93 kids, right?
yeah,
So
I didn't
this,
play Chrono Trigger till later, so I wouldn't
yeah.
have had that.
And you probably wouldn't realistically like when Chrono Trigger came out, you would have been like 6, or like you would have been
Yeah,
younger than that. You would have been like 3 or 4.
yeah,
When you're
I might have.
cognitive enough to play it, you probably wouldn't appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I got drawn in because of the Mario aspect, obviously, but then I started playing it, and I was like, "Holy shit! There's a lot of shit going on here." I don't know. It was one of the first Mario games to have a lot of unique characters or like characterized enemies, um, and like dialogue. Mario didn't speak per se, but people spoke to him past like generic stuff like you'd see in Mario 64 or whatever. It had a lot of like personality for its time, I think, as well.
Yeah, it
Um,
definitely did because like I mean there was a bit of a I wouldn't say an edge, but there was like a punk aspect to Mario in the '90s, especially in terms of like Nintendo's marketing about the guy. But
yeah,
this is the game that was like the most witty for sure.
yeah, and
Tongue in
I
cheek
can't
would be
remember
the
what the
word, I
marketing
think.
was per se, but I think it was also like pushed a lot at video rental stores in that time, because I know I started off by renting it like 3 times in a row before my parents just bought it for me.
They're like, come on,
Um,
this is getting ridiculous.
yeah, but yeah, I mean that's like my high level stuff. Basically, it was I guess my gateway into RPGs in a way, and the like action command system was really like also something that well, it's not revolutionary. Like it's not the first game that did it or anything.
Hmm.
But it's a very like a mainstream game that did it, where it was like involved and it wasn't just completely turn based.
Yeah, because like I've mentioned this would be like back when I started my channel. I mentioned how I used to hate turn-based RPGs. Like I found them boring. And the one reason that this game stuck out to me back in the day was because I was so involved in it. It's like, oh, if I do really well, like if I perform well, I won't get hurt or I'll minimize damage and I'll end battles quicker. And I think that's really even like obviously to this day, like that's still like the basis of this series is that the action, the what was the word that you used for it?
Action
Yeah,
commands.
the action commands.
Yeah,
And really like fine tuning your skills for that.
yeah, because it basically differs in normal RPGs in that there's two axes of like character of player improvement. Usually, the axis of player improvement is like getting new gear, leveling up, learning skills, etc., where you feel your characters grow.
Yeah.
But you also had personal growth in action commands, and that like most people when they start off are probably not like well timed, like I'm gonna call it well timed block, but like action command blocking
Yeah.
attacks from enemies to reduce damage perfectly on every attack. And like hell, even when I still play it, I can't perfectly time every attack.
Yeah. There's
Um,
some that just completely throw you off.
Yeah, but it's a thing where you feel like a learning curve and an improvement curve, and there weren't a lot of games I think, or RPGs specifically, like that at the time.
Like these goddamn fuzzies on screen. Their attack patterns. When I for this particular Gaming Pilgrimage episode, when I encountered them in Paper Mario, I always got hit by them and I could not figure out the timing. Then when I had to fight them in Thousand Year Door, I had the timing down, so I was
Yeah.
way better at dealing with them.
Yeah, and fuzzies are actually a really good example of something you really want to learn how to time, because
Yeah,
if you don't,
they're so
two-pronged
annoying.
sword.
Yeah, they're super annoying. I think the other thing too that's obviously Paper is super distinctive about this series. Like the
Yeah,
art style is so colorful and eye-catching. And when you think back to everything on the N64, it's all blocky and jagged, and some of it's really rough to look at these days. But I think Paper Mario's aged quite well, and I know it's as of now it's like in hiatus, but there was like an HD project which had someone basically creating brand new PNGs that would just overwrite the existing game's art assets that were super sharp. And I think that's the one thing that this series has retained really well going into the modern era, is that like the artwork is of high quality and that art style still pops.
When I played it for this, I just upscaled the resolution basically, and it's still like there's occasionally a little bit of like weirdness on the edges of stuff,
Yeah.
but because like you said, it's not using like polygons at all. It's just flat 2D art for the most part. That's just like translated in 3D. And the 3D models that are in it are pretty basic, like texturing.
Yeah.
Um,
And they
it scales up pretty well.
they scale very reasonably well.
Yep. Yeah, because it was easy for them even back then to make high res stuff, because like memory capacity wasn't as much of a concern with the like lower quality of the textures themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think aesthetically, yeah, also it was a huge like departure. It was just really different in a lot of ways from anything Nintendo had put out, and obviously, like the elephant in the room is Super Mario RPG 7 Stars, which is really the precursor to this. But
Yeah.
it did not get a lot of traction, and it wasn't as it's distinct looking, but it's not as pleasantly distinct looking
Yeah.
as Paper Mario is. It doesn't have like the gimmick that Paper Mario had at the time that really like sold it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing carrying Mario RPG was like it was attached to Squaresoft, and that they were the biggest console RPG developers at the time, and everyone was like drawn to that and that aspect of the crossover. But like in terms of like, I think the action timing in that is a lot weirder because there's not a lot of feedback, whereas this game has an abundance of feedback. It like shows you the button you need to press, and how you like it gives you a lot of timing cues.
Yep.
So
it's got
it's
camera zoom in and everything like that. Yeah, they did
Yeah.
a lot of focusing on usability for this.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why it, like, especially as a kid, that I really appealed to this and really liked it.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that I think this series, because like a lot of like main Nintendo IPs don't, I find like when I look at the majority of Zelda games, or I look at the majority of like other Mario games, like Sunshine or Mario 64 or Mario Galaxy, like I don't think of them as being like having a lot of personality. It's kind of like going through I guess like a Disney film, like a classical era Disney or Pixar film, where it's got like a certain tone and level to it.
Yeah.
And but this game is so freaking witty and has its tongue like through its cheek, and they play with like the idea of everything being paper so well.
Yeah, and then gets expounded upon even more in Thousand Year Door. Although I will say, I think Sunshine does have more personality than 64 and
Yeah,
Galaxy.
I could agree with that, but between the two, and I think the one thing that this game does well too is there's a lot of variety to the core gameplay. Like right now on screen, there's like one of like the obviously a puzzle that's seen in many games where they go, oh, where's the thing? Follow it with your eye. But there's a lot of variety what you're doing in between the different levels, and like just doing outside of fighting, which for a lot of RPGs, not many do that. A lot of them are just combat and exploration all the way through.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, previously before we started, you were saying that in some ways you think this is the stronger game between this and Thousand Year Door. Why is that?
So I think the thing. This is gonna get into a big talk because we're gonna have to go into specifics.
That's
But I
fine.
think the biggest thing that Mario 64 actually does is its levels are more clean and I guess to the point. My biggest example is like 1,000 Year Door has a lot of beautiful environments. The environments are probably more interesting on average than 64, but they have a lot of awkwardness to their level design. Like World 4 and 1,000 Year Door, which is Creepy Steeple, is literally just like 3 areas that they make you run back and forth through 4 times.
Yeah, as soon as you started
Uh,
talking, I was kind of nodding and thinking to myself, there is a lot of backtracking in
yeah,
Thousand Year Door.
Keelhaul Key is run to one side of the island, back, run to the other side of the island again, back, and then you finally go into the dungeon. The dungeons themselves in 1,000 Year Door are generally like pretty good. It's just like the pre-levels to it are like it feels like a lot of busy work. I love
Mm.
like Glitzville as well, but when you've done it one time and you go back and play it again, it's very monotonous. You're going through all the battles over and over. The story beats are like few and far between the fights. Um, and the fights, while they introduce some new enemies and concepts, aren't like overly interesting. Yeah, there's just like a bunch of levels in Thousand Year Door I feel like are gimmicky for gimmick's sake, and like I like them for that. They're not bad. It's just that I think 64 is much better at like cutting the fluff in their design while still keeping it like good.
Yeah, I think they're more of straight shots. I think these levels, it's more of going clearing one area and going to the next. It's a bit more linear in some cases, whereas Thousand Year Door has some of that. You need a key here to open a thing here, and then if you get this thing, you need to go back here to open this room. There's a lot of that type of design, whereas I find hey, got a new follower. Thank you, Devil in the Pipes. Whereas in Paper Mario, there's a lot of more of a straightforward shot and just kind of solving a key puzzle, and then you unlock progress in like multiple areas, and then generally you follow a path forward.
Yeah, like I think Boo Mansion is a really good example of something in Mario 64 that isn't just like a walk through the whole area. Like it has puzzles. You have freedom to explore the area, but it's not so far away from the main area that you feel like you're doing massive backtracking while still making progress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that's the primary differentiator I feel between the two. I think Thousand Year Door has better overall polished combat and mechanics. The star powers are a lot more interesting because they're actually interactive,
Yeah,
and most of them are good. Whereas 64 has a real problem of having a bunch of like absolutely garbage star powers.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It does.
so you don't really feel like progress. You basically use like one or two of them. I think when I did my playthrough for this, I only used one. Um, uh, no, there'd be two because there's the one way later.
Yeah,
But yeah, and then what else? 1,000 Years partner. Obviously, the writing you've touched on, I think, is better. Like 64 is it's a generic Mario story told through the lens of an RPG.
it's like a Mario story told with like a tongue in cheek flavor.
Yeah,
Where
whereas
they're a lot
1,000 Year Door,
cheekier and wittier about how they're going about it. And this is
yeah,
kind of like the start of Bowser's like I don't want to say like brodacious attitude, but he's kind of got like that bro type. I'm basically saying Bowser is like a college student. He's got like that type of personality of being like a dude bro.
yeah, and yeah, I think 1,000 Year Door is better story, better combat mechanics. Uh, the levels are the main differentiator for me. And I think partners, 1,000 Year Door probably has the edge up. I
I
mean,
think it 100% has the edge up, except for maybe is it Bouette in this game who's the
Bo,
female
Bo,
bow? Yeah, that makes sense
yeah,
because she wears
Bo
bows.
definitely is probably the highlight character
Yeah, she's
in
got so much
64.
personality.
Yeah, I think Watt's cool too, but Watt's just kind of weird and is not characterized very
Yeah.
well in the game.
I also want to quickly, before I forget about it, I want to acknowledge the chat. Thank you, JD, for chiming in. He says that he really wishes that Paper Mario and Thousand Year Door get re-released, and I think it is like there's like no reason not to, especially
Yeah,
because they like we were saying before, like they hold up really well visually, and just having that on like a screen like the Switch would look really sharp. And thanks, Devin, for commenting with your Metal Gear Solid 2 reference, which I won't repeat because it's gibberish to anyone who hasn't played Metal Gear Solid 2. But I actually wanted to touch up a couple things because like a lot of like the things you mentioned are come down to like level design, primarily level design, right? And like kind of game flow.
Yeah, I think game flow is the best way to put it.
Yeah, because like this is probably an easier game to marathon, I think, especially because
64.
that was primarily how I played these games. Was like long sessions of trying to clear much of the game as I can.
Yeah,
And I think this game is easier to do that for because you get more variety because you're going through the game at a steadier pace and you're seeing more new things. Like I think you mentioned before, but the Shy Guys toy box is like one of my favorite levels in
yep.
the game. It's such a unique flavor and it gives like an edge to the Shy Guys that I never knew they had.
Yeah.
Whereas
You've got
before they're just kind of these weird enemies.
yeah, you've got like all the different varieties of Shy Guys. You've got Anti Guy who's like terrifying.
Oh my god.
Uh,
I remember as a kid being like, "Oh my god, I can't play. He keeps destroying me."
and you've got Gourmet Guy who's got his whole thing, and it flips into the two different areas. Yeah, I mean,
Gourmet
there's just
Guy.
a lot of characterization for a lot of Mario villains who were very generic. Like Koopas prior to this were just like, I mean, they were just fodder really. They were dudes who went into shells and you kick the shell. And this one has one as a partner who you get some like characterization from, but really the biggest Koopa in the game is Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado has like an entire personality arc story like interact or Koopa Koot. Koopa Koot's good too, but Colorado I think is the shining star.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's an entire Koopa village like and Goomba village. You get like a lot of characterization on enemies or characters that like Mario had never really treated as anything other than fodder before.
Yeah, it makes you think about how Mario has mercilessly slaughtered Koopas by the hundreds, and now you discover there's like communities of peaceful ones, and it's kind of interesting that they don't fear him.
Yeah.
Especially because like Bowser is King Koopa, and you think it's interesting in some of those regards, but they get
Yeah.
more into that sort of stuff in Thousand Year Door than they do in this game. But this game definitely plays with all of the players in Paper Mario.
Yeah. They like lightly touch on stuff, but they don't go too in depth about like the politics
Yeah.
or like interactions of
I would love
enemies.
that. I would love that if there was like in Chrono Trigger there's a trial.
Yeah.
I would love there was a trial for Mario for being like a war criminal. For like
I mean, yeah, it's
for killing hundreds of Yoshis and just slaughtering Goombas and Koopas.
it seems oh, I was going to say also, it seems like the ones who work for Bowser are doing it willingly, right?
Yeah. They
They're
seem
not
like
being
they
forced
seem
into servitude.
like they generally seem to like Bowser.
Yeah.
There's a couple that are fearful of him, but like especially in this kind of gets outside of this series, but in like Bowser's Inside story, it seems like they like really like they look up to Bowser.
Yeah.
And
And
there's
in the most recent Paper Mario even like in oh god, I'm going to actually forget the name.
the Origami King.
Origami King, there we go. I was going to say Color Splash, but I'm like no, that's wrong.
Oh god.
Even in Origami King, there's like more like characterization of like how the troops like want to help Bowser or work for him, etc.
I think kind of looking back at this game, you mentioned the star powers already. They're kind of hit and miss, a lot of them.
Yeah.
I think the things that I found, like overall, obviously very enjoyable time with this game. I think so much of it holds up well, like the flow, the art style. I think the writing holds up well, but I think like the core struggle of Peach gets kidnapped and you need to deal with Bowser is kind of tired, and it made me really excited to go to Thousand Year Door because it's so different in that regard. But I found that like party members outside of Bo and I found like I don't know. There's something about the party members. I think they found a better way to integrate them into the story in Thousand Year Door, whereas it feels like you get you get is it Cooper or Coops in this game? It's Cooper, right?
It's Cooper.
Yeah. Because I mean, come on, those are so close together.
Yeah.
and I think Coops has like so much more of a personality than like Cooper. Cooper's like he's got his one arc, and then that's kind of it.
Yeah, most of the characters in 64 don't have as much characterization as their Thousand Year Door counterparts. A lot of that ends up coming down to that they get a lot of characterization when they're first introduced,
Yeah.
and then it really falls off. Like they try to do it with like the letters
Mhm.
in the game where you can go to the post office and see the letters, but like because they're not like direct character to character interactions, it loses a lot of impact, I find.
Mhm.
And so you don't have like that that connection. Like Coops has like the entire arc, like before and after Hooktail's castle, that kind of builds up his character and his reason why he's with you.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of the other characters in 64 are kind of just like, oh shit, it's Mario, I'm gonna join him
Oh
because
my
I want to
god, your
get stronger.
mustache.
Yeah. So like generally yes, in Thousand Year Door 2 they join up with him because they want to be stronger or learn things because they can be with Mario or whatever. But like their reasons are deeper than that most of the time.
And I find they have like more interactions outside of their initial scenario,
Yeah, most of them have
which
a
really
supporting
helps.
NPC in some way, whether they're alive or dead. Cough, cough.
Yeah, that's true. Is there anything about the original game that we haven't really touched on, or you want to go further into before we start crossing over to Thousand Year Door?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, really, it was just like Paper Mario for me as well. Like, was a really big, uh, like it was a lot of strategy in how you play because of the way they did the like level up
Yes,
choices.
that's
Like,
yes. Thank you for mentioning that because I did want to mention level ups and how that I found my two playthroughs between Paper Mario and Thousand Year Door were so different because I was prioritizing different stats.
yeah, yeah,
Which,
and I
to
think
clarify for anyone who hasn't played, there are three stats. Whenever you get 100 star, I think they're just called. Are they just called stars? What
star points.
star points? Yeah,
Yep.
you get them after battle. Depending on your level, they scale. So, like in some areas, you might get like 20 after a battle. Then after you level up, you might only get like 4 after a battle. So they scale quite harshly to keep you in a general level range. But once you get 100, you level up, and you can level up your HP, your FP, which is your flower points, which determines like basically like mana in any other game, or badge points, which is like special abilities that you can equip to yourself. Like if it's more HP, more damage, or like special attacks that then cost FP.
Yeah, so I think badge points and badges itself are like one of the ways that they really make the game replayable in terms of your build. Obviously, your build can be determined by like you can go like really hard on HP or really hard on FP or whatever. But the badges are where like all the uniqueness comes in, and the way they like circumvent the fact that Mario as a character doesn't really gain new gear or equipment per se,
Like you
like in
jump and you have
other
a hammer.
yeah, like in other yeah, and you upgrade them. But in other RPGs, there's a lot more usually like granularity in like equipment and like abilities gained off of equipment and stuff. And I think like the badge system, especially for the time it was introduced, was like a lot more depth. Not than other RPGs per se, because obviously Chrono Trigger came out before this, and you're not going to beat that with the Mario system. But for a like kid friendly or like not beginner game, but you know what I mean, like a simplified version of an RPG, the badges are really easy to comprehend from a surface level, but
Yeah.
add a lot of depth to like playstyle.
Yeah, and like it really helps. Like we talked about how like even just in like my experience of jumping between this game and Thousand Year Door, by the time I got to Thousand Year Door, I was so into grips with the system that I was better at more proficient at playing it. For those replays, once you know where badges are or badges that you like to use, you can totally reshape your build around that. And if you're even just someone doing your first playthrough, you can just like divide your level ups equally and you'll come out with a totally fine experience. And I
Yeah,
think that's something that is kind of genius that doesn't really work in a lot of RPGs, especially of that era. Like you don't
yeah.
really
And
see that.
the other thing about like the Mario RPGs is that like unlike like there's a lot of overworld stuff in Mario RPG because of the like abilities you get from partners and the abilities you get from your like hammer and jump. So there's a lot of like overworld exploration as well before you get into the combat. And something that really helps promote it is because you want to find the other badges because they're going to open up new combat opportunities for you and stuff.
Yeah,
Like the items are like okay to get, but I wouldn't say any of the items are like things you use a lot
they're pretty much
kind of.
just they're just there to end battles quicker, basically.
Yeah, or like provide like minor interactions with very specific encounters or stuff like that. But yeah, like the badges are what you really want to find, and so like it helps drive a lot of the world exploration, and that you need to know where these things are to like explore your options, or like once you know where they are, you've learned by exploring the world. So there's a lot of like purposeful design in the game that is forcing you to do world exploration instead of just going from point A to point B.
Yeah, and a couple instances too, like giving you reasons to go back to previous
Yeah,
areas.
yeah. I was just gonna add backtracking.
And
Yep.
even like the one neat thing too is like especially with like the action command system is how it's like, Mario jumps, like jump to dot to and time it to do damage. Or I think this is more so the case in the Mario and Luigi series, where you use the jumps are always consistent.
Yeah.
And you jump over stuff, and that has more further interaction with the world and its combat. But in this game, like, just the timing of figuring all that out, it's so unique. And I also want to mention this because I saw it on screen and I didn't mention it earlier. I love Tattle as a means of replacing the scan ability in other RPGs, where you learn about the enemies. You get a nice little bit of flavor, and it also lets you see HP, and it's kind of like a fun thing to do, to try to get all the tattles for all the different enemies and bosses.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm not gonna say like depth in that, but yeah, it's interesting that they like build stuff into that. We can talk about like partners more in a bit too.
Yeah. I feel like once we talk about Thousand Year Door, that's where like all the partner talks to come into, because you have so much going on there.
Yeah, like 64 was a really good starting point for them, but Thousand Year Door kind of really solidified partners and their abilities and stuff as well.
It's a shame then that all the other games were like, screw partners.
What are you talking about? Origami partners.
It's like Thousand Year Door was like, wait a minute, people love all these unique characters we're giving them.
Yeah.
Till Miyamoto said no. So do you want to move on then to Thousand Year Door?
Sure. Actually, there was one thing I was going to mention because we talked about it a bit ago. So I agree that this game is fairly rote in terms of its story, but what it did do that was very unique and new for the time was it gave you Peach's perspective.
That's true. After every level, you play through a brief segment as Princess Peach, who is trapped in her floating castle that Bowser stole.
Yeah. And so you actually get to control her, and that's how you get a lot of characterization of like her and also of Bowser indirectly and directly. And so like, even though the story was very generic in terms of like Bowser kidnaps Peach, Bowser wants to take over Mushroom Kingdom, etc., I think they found a way of putting a pretty good like spin on it.
Yeah.
That was unique and compelling.
And I will say they really highlight how routine their relationship is, for Peach just to be like, oh, this is a thing, but Mario got his butt kicked really badly, so I guess I'm worried.
Yeah.
Like, she's not like really concerned for her safety. And that's kind of like an interesting perspective to this idea of a princess who's been kidnapped like 4 or 5 times in other games up to this point.
Yeah. She basically knows that nothing's going to happen to her. It's more like, I'm more worried about the people in my kingdom
than me.
Mario himself than myself.
Yeah, that's fair. Man, what a weird thought. Just like, I'll be fine. It's like he took me away for a weekend.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'm just gonna quickly stop the video there and switch over my footage.
Make me stop watching you using Goombario in the first dungeon with ball bombs.
Hey man, like, the party members don't really have HP.
Yeah, but Koops can take out the ball bombs without getting hurt himself.
That's true. All right. So now we're going to discuss what I think is the peak of the Paper Mario series, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I think this is, without a doubt, like one of the smartest games that has ever like Nintendo's ever been attached to, like in terms of writing. I think it is super replayable because of its writing. Granted, we discussed already some of the gameplay points that make it a little less fun to revisit frequently. Maybe space out your playthroughs a couple years apart, at least. But I think this game is just so witty. It's got so much personality and charm that it wears on its sleeve that it's like impossible to not like it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is overall the better package.
All right. So this is another thing that we mentioned briefly before we got into it. But oh my god. How weird is Rogueport as like a setting?
Yeah. Rogueport is, I want to say, the darkest thing Nintendo has done, and even though on the surface it's not that bad, now of course the footage is cut away. But previously, I guess you couldn't even see it.
Actually, I can speed it up
fine.
to
there's literally a noose in the middle of Rogueport, which already implies things that Nintendo usually stays far away from. You see people getting like roughed up by the mafia in the background during cutscenes. You see like you literally get mugged yourself, and you see other muggings going on. It's a very like darker tone and aesthetic. Like the stakes as well. Like I'm not gonna get too much into the end game stuff, but like the overall story and goings on are much more imminently dangerous. Bowser is like a cartoon villain in a way where like he has an evil plan, but he doesn't actually like harm people really. The villains in this are decidedly more reprehensible.
I think the word I would use is sinister.
Yeah, sinister works. Yeah, because Bowser is literally like a comedic foil in this game.
Yeah, it kind of like highlights how, in retrospect, Bowser isn't that bad compared to these new villains.
Yeah, and I think it's very like, and Nintendo was pretty experimental at that time, but it's still fairly bold from a Nintendo standpoint.
Especially like the most
what they did, like-
child-friendly like video game icon.
Yeah,
And this is a great example. It's probably like with Goombella. She's so freaking sassy, and there's points where people are like, "Hey, cutie, come here," and she's like, "Ew, gross! Like, don't come at me with that attitude." And you're like, "Oh, whoa, Nintendo game,
Yeah.
what?"
yeah. There's a lot more. I mean, for like, I want to say human interaction. Like, it's not as like fantasized or fairy taleized as like other Mario stuff. It's a lot more, not down to earth, but like realistic, I guess. Or
Yeah, like right there, like Goombella's like threatening to scream if they get too close to her. Which, in hindsight, Rogueport's probably the wrong city to try to do that, because I don't think anyone would respond if you screamed. But the point is, like, that's a way more human and like commonsensical thing than something that happens in the Mushroom Kingdom in the frickin' Mario universe.
yeah,
Okay, so Rogueport's awesome. I mean, just looking at the footage, like I love the artwork in this game. And when I turned it off for the recording, but when I played through it, I was using a HD texture pack, which it's literally just PNGs that have been redrawn over. And so everything is like looks the same, it's consistent, it's just higher quality, it's just in 1080p.
thank God
And-
you did the stylishes. I would have been so disappointed.
Well, when I had to go through this again, I was like, I'm just going to have this on because, like, why would I not? And yeah, the stylishes are great. Another reason for replayability.
Yeah.
Right there. But, I cannot get enough of how this game looks. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, man, if this was on the Switch right now, I'd be all about that.
I liked having the way I played it be accessible, and yeah, there's a lot of options for modern playing for very good quality, even if you don't get texture packs. Like if you run it on like stuff, you can get pretty good upscaling.
And you can get widescreen support, too.
Yep. Yeah. More on that topic, I guess, of aesthetics and whatever. We've already talked about how I think like Thousand Year Door's environments are a lot more detailed and intricate. But one of the other things we haven't really talked about is music. Do you think Thousand Year Door has better music than 64?
I think I think at the very least it's more memorable. I think there's more variety to it than like Paper Mario sounds like a Mario game, which means it has a very good, competent score. I don't find all of it super memorable or catchy, but it's good at what it does, and it sets up mood and tone. But I think the Thousand Year Door soundtrack has some like really catchy battle music and boss themes. Especially like the last boss theme is like such a departure from like what you would expect out of Paper Mario, like even just in terms of the music. So I think overall I like the music better in this game, but I think Paper Mario does a good job of making you feel like you're playing a Mario game.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only song in 64 that I would say is an all-time classic is Crystal King's theme.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I like Goombella a lot more than your Goomba party member in Mario 64. She like her tattles are like so funny.
Yeah, well, she has personality and even in her tattle stuff. Yeah, Goombario is like a boilerplate character.
Yeah, his biggest personality trait is that he's a Mario fanboy.
and that he's like, he's got a family, I guess. I mean, they introduced all of his family members.
It's true. He's
throughout
got
the
grandparents. He's got his dad with the mustache. Also, check out the mafia guys from Sunshine in the background. I think actually in this cutscene don't they mug someone or something?
They shake down a guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that guy! I love this era of Nintendo so much. Yeah, right here, right there. They shake him down in the background.
Yep.
I love those details so much. But I think one thing that struck me from a gameplay perspective is that if you're, I'm trying to think of the best way to frame it because it sounds really redundant in my head. But basically, if you know the system of Paper Mario, I find that this game can be very easy because of the badge that lets you just continuously jump if you keep getting the timings right. So you can utterly destroy enemies and bosses, provided you can jump on them.
Yep.
So I found that was like something very impactful on my playthrough. It was something that I thought it's rewarding, but at the same time, it makes some aspects of the game like more redundant or feel a bit less satisfying, just because I know if I can keep timing my A presses, I can just destroy everything.
Yeah, I think power bounce in both of the games is very broken if you know how to use it. Obviously, there's like it's really interesting actually. Like we can talk about it later if you want, but to see the balance changes, quote unquote, they made between games in terms of like BP cost of badges and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think like when you play as a kid, you're not like necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there's kids out there who did it, but aren't really necessarily trying to go for like a broken build or I highly don't. There's probably meta builds or something like that.
Oh, I'm sure there is. There's like this is the most efficient playthrough. You do you level up in this order and you get these badges and you use these powers.
But I think generally people are gonna go for like what like sticks with them first. Like I don't know. Everybody has a different way they play RPGs, but usually once I find something effective, I tend to like stick with it.
Yeah.
To the like unfortunate like exclusion of other mechanics sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think power bounce it's interesting. It's like the highest skill ceiling you can get with a badge, but at the same time, it's like super monotonous.
Yeah, it's not as exciting, even though some of the other badges are not as effective. They're more interesting just because they provide different diversions to gameplay, or they bring in status effects that you otherwise don't get a lot of interaction with.
Yeah.
But like there's something about this too. I think it's because does the game natively run at 60
FPS?
Yeah. Or is that only just because of Dolphin?
I don't know. It's probably because of Dolphin. I don't know if we were trying to avoid it or not.
But I find that it was just easier to do the action commands in this game over Mario 64, which I think comes from like input and frame rate.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's because of the frame rate, but I think the input windows are also bigger in Thousand Year Door.
Okay.
I personally find that if I go immediately from playing 64 to Thousand Year Door, at the very beginning when I first start playing, I actually miss stuff because I'm so used to the pinpoint timing that Thousand Year Door is like slowed down. Like you have a lot faster movement acceleration, it feels like, in Mario 64 compared to Thousand Year Door. This is like getting super technical.
Yeah.
But like the rate that Mario descends from the apex of his jump, because jumping is like the only place where it's really a problem for timing.
Yeah.
Is like slowed down in Thousand Year Door to give you a bigger window, but if you're used to the 64
you press
timing,
it too
you'll
early.
actually press it too early and it'll feel weird.
Yeah.
Like Thousand Year Door to me is like it's basically that like you want to hit the button when you are much closer visually to the enemy, like basically when you're right on top of them, whereas 64 is like predictive in a way, like you have to press it a bit earlier than when you're right on top of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the timings I think are different between the two games. And I think Thousand Year Doors is generally a bit easier because I think they made the input window bigger. But I have actually nothing to back that up research-wise.
It's just your feeling.
Feel, yes.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It's valid. Feelings are valid. But like, there's so much about this game that just works. I think I want to talk about it now because I'll forget otherwise. But I think the one thing that doesn't work for me outside of some of the backtracking that some levels require is the side quest system where it's like the
Yeah.
help board. I find that really, even though there's like some fun interactions you get out of it, you don't get that. I mean, most rewards just here's coins,
Yeah.
which
So
obviously you can buy certain badges or certain items from the Bazier, and you can get like the Wario outfit for Mario and stuff like that. But
yeah.
they're really fetch questy and boring, and really, especially if you're trying to do all of them. Like initially I was trying to do all of them and I was like, I'm gonna spend forever playing this game if I do all of them. And I find that's a shame because some of them do give you fun interactions with characters, especially because all of them are centered in Rogueport, and you just get some wacky stuff coming out of it. But so many of them are just go here, find this guy, talk to him, then go talk to this guy.
Yeah, I think this game ends up suffering from having too much content sometimes.
Yeah,
Like, it's a much bigger game than 64. 64 had the one side quest chain basically with Koopa Koot, where you would like do favors for him, and it's annoying the first time you do it. When you do it the second time and you actually like know what he wants, a lot of the time you can circumvent it.
yeah,
But the rewards he ends up giving you are usually like cool like side mini games or like a decent number of star pieces, which are much less common in that game unless you know where to like ground pound, because like both games feature a thing where if you ground pound the ground in certain areas, there are like tiles you can flip over to, excuse me, to get star pieces.
which those are a
um
resource you can trade in for. I think it's like certain
Badges.
badges and powers.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's badges in both. Thousand Year Door might have one other use,
Yeah,
but 64 is like entirely badges.
yeah.
um but yeah, so like those are really hard to find on your own unless you just like have an intuition of where one is. Sometimes it like feels obvious, but like the star piece economy of Mario 64 is a lot lower.
You haven't
So
thought of the star piece economy, Jack.
Yeah, so the rewards from the side quests are a lot like more important, I feel. Whereas like in this one, the rewards, like you said, for all the side quests are like coins, which are you're generally not going to be that low on unless you're like buying all of the Luigi books or other like pointless items that for some reason cost too much money.
Yeah. Like the Wario outfit is like, I remember being
Yeah,
like really expensive, and it's like, it just changes the look. It doesn't really do anything else.
you always got to buy the Wario one
You
though.
got
'Cause
it. You
then
got to
get the
get that
Luigi one.
W on the hat.
Yeah, you combine the Luigi one and the Wario one, and you get the worst Nintendo character.
But everyone's favorite.
Oh. But yeah, I think like the problem with the side quests in this game is, like you said, they are like the general problem with levels. Like I said, it's backtracky. Almost all of them require you to go back and just do like mundane stuff. Not like most are not compelling, except for like a couple that are interesting. Some of them do have good like story hooks as well, but like the payoff is almost never worth it, except for the one where you get to talk to Bo. Um,
Yeah.
which is at the very end of like literally post game. So
Yeah. That's fair.
and yeah, and then the rewards you get are just like coins 90% of the time, and the ones that aren't coins are not like game changing really. There's like a couple ones you want to do, but past that, it's like a lot of just like busy work and extra.
Yeah.
Like I think the only so they added like a bunch of side quests which don't really add much to the game past the main story. They added like the side mini games which were in the first one that are fine. I mean the ones in this game are way better.
Mhm.
And there's like a couple more things to collect in the world besides badges, star pieces, and your upgrade blocks.
And the sprites, which are
Yes.
the shine sprites, which are used to
Yeah.
upgrade your party members. Which I think to get back on track with like things that we find strong about this game, because I think our biggest weakness overall, our biggest. Oh yeah, I got so distracted that there's the part where the Goombas are being real weird.
Yep. Your favorite part.
Oh god, I love it so much. It's so funny. Oh, I love the personality so much. But god, I got so distracted by that. But I like how they made party members more strategic in this game in battles. Like they have HP, they have different defenses, and you can choose the order in battle, and so I find that even increases build variety, because like my Mario and my playthrough was super squishy because I was focusing on badges and flower power, and I'd often, if need be, would hide behind Koops at points and stuff like that so that he could soak up some damage, and I could just keep spamming powerful abilities. And I like how this game lends itself to that. And I like how there's a clearer progression line for your variety of party members, and you can really focus on which party members you like.
Yeah, like in Mario 64, the only core interaction you have with the partner, other than which partner you picked, was like deciding who goes first on the turn. And this one, you can like use them as shields. Hopefully, some enemies can ignore them and go for the back line
Yeah.
to block stuff. Like they have different stats, so that some of them actually excel at like taking more hits versus dealing. Well, not really versus dealing more damage, but there is some damage difference. But yeah, there's a lot more depth in the partner system on the RPG side, as well as the actual like characterization side, and the fact that there are badges specifically tailored for partners and also for Mario, so it makes you split up your resources a lot more. Um, yeah, if you want to go for like a massive BP build, which is usually what I do, where I just get like 99 BP.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like there's so many badges that increase your stats and your HP and stuff like that like you can almost compensate for not leveling up your HP and other, and like even to a point, like you obviously need flower points to use a lot of the abilities, and you need to start bumping them at points, but you can almost like get around a couple levels for it just through badges.
Yeah. Also, great actual action command timing counterattacks, which I think is a feature of the game that like 90% of players will never like learn about.
Yeah,
because the game doesn't actually teach you directly.
Yeah, it pretty much just has it happen, and that's how you learn. I also just want to speed up the gameplay to one of my favorite. Did I pass it? No, I didn't. You probably know what I'm thinking. One of my favorite set of interactions in the entire game that is just so goddamn funny to me, and I just absolutely adore. And I think it just really ties in how this game they threw all their cards at just being full of personality.
Yeah.
And I legit crack up every time I read through. So this is like a chest that's super sketchy, and it's like clearly trying to trick you into opening it, and you're like and it's like, oh man, like obviously this is a bad deal. And then when he busts out of the chest every time you get tricked into unlocking him, like yeah, even like the professor's like, don't do it, man, like this is sketchy as hell. And just when he bursts out and and it's like playing this nebulous music, and he's like, oh yeah, I did it, I tricked you, now I'm going to give you this super useful ability. Oh man, is that embarrassing for you that you can turn into a plane? Oh man. And it's like all this like inadvertently helpful stuff, and he just views it as evil. And I just love that.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot more out of the world gameplay mechanics as well, which they did through these chests.
Yeah.
But also like the characterization of even how you get your abilities themselves is like a moment for them to add like more really I guess flex their writing muscles and add like characterization to even that.
Like all this thing is a face on a background.
Yes.
And he's like one of my favorite characters in the game. Like it's so it's so weird to me that they're able just to nail like the tone and the personality they're going for. And I think that's just such a good exemplification of that. And like another thing that I think often gets overlooked in the discourse of this game is Luigi.
Yeah.
Like just going up to talking about Luigi, and he just gives you this crazy set of stories about his adventures in the Waffle Kingdom.
Yeah, I think they had a good start on it in 64, where if you go back to Mario's house, you can go into the basement, and Luigi has a secret journal where he talks about all the things that are going on with him, which is not like a ton, but he mostly talks about his like hearing through the grapevine about Mario's adventures. But then this is
before Nintendo like really gave Luigi his chance to shine.
Yeah, was Luigi's Mansion before this?
I'm referring to Paper Mario 64 that was like before Luigi was like Luigi was just player 2 back in those days. Now Luigi's like his own star.
Yeah.
And Luigi's Mansion obviously was like a big push to that.
Yeah, and then they expanded out on this game by literally having him have like his own parallel adventure
But here's
where
the
he
question for you:
talked things up.
Do you actually believe the Waffle Kingdom stuff happened, or he's just like making up a story?
I mean, based on the partners, you have to, unless he's paying all the partners. Obviously, he's clearly embellishing every part of the story based on
Yeah.
your like conversations with his partners. Which really curiously, his like last story tidbit features a exclusively designed character race uh, for him that is not used in either game in any of the Paper Mario games anywhere else. It's like the Candlewick looking guy.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like they added like a bunch of extra stuff just for his like weird made up
Just
story.
for a bit.
Yeah, just for a bit.
Like in my mind, because we're gonna get into this in a little bit, talking about like the series at large and like what they've been doing and like maybe why these games hold up so favorably to the other games. But like something that seems like a no-brainer is they should just set one of these games in the Waffle Kingdom.
Yeah.
Either let us live out what Luigi said happened, or just call it Paper Luigi or something, or actually just have us go there after the matter as Mario.
I remember as a kid I wrote like I can't remember, was it a comic book? I wrote something that was about like the adventures of Luigi in Thousand Year Door as like a different thing because it like I don't know, it's not that it connected with me, but it was so like unique or interesting.
It's
Like
so out
obviously I
there.
get to play through Mario's thing, but yeah.
And it's like so punny too. Like every character he mentions is like a pun based off of
Yep.
like some sort of delicacy or breakfast type dessert like waffles.
Yep.
And I just love it so much. And I love how there's all this time and effort and care spent on it, and it doesn't serve any purpose to the game at all outside of just being weird, really, and being wacky.
It crafts a wider world or a more like interconnects more characters. It characterizes Luigi because like obviously the reason why he's doing this mission is because he idolizes Mario,
And
he
he's
wants
like,
to,
"Oh, you're busy with your thing, so this is what I had to do."
And I will say, probably not sticker star, but for the most part in later Paper Mario games, they do a fairly okay job at still characterizing Luigi. Maybe I'm just thinking of Origami King as a more recent one.
Is he particularly prominent in Origami King?
He shows up once in each chapter. It's kind of a similar thing that they do with Thousand Year Door, where like after every chapter you go back and talk to him in Hub. But in Thousand Year Door or in Origami King, it's a little bit different. But I like that Luigi is a support character who kind of has this like he wants to help role, but he never really like lives up exactly to what is expected of him.
Yeah, especially considering like there's like a Mario and Luigi RPG series where he's pulling equal weight to Mario.
Yeah.
And in Paper Mario, it's like, nah, I'm not going to help you. I'm not a party member. Although he's a bit more active in Super Paper Mario, I guess.
Yeah, very much more active. That game's a whole nother beast.
That's a whole other pasta going on there. But I know obviously we keep gushing about the writing and the tone and the wit, but like let's talk more about like how unique this game can be in terms of like either it's like locations or characters or anything like that, because I think that's something that we cannot stress enough. Is there like what really strikes out to you about other particular areas or characters or bosses? And while you're doing that, I'm just gonna show off a area of this game that happens a little bit after the segment, because this is pretty much just talking happening in this gameplay.
Yeah, I think it's really like the variety and the like stark contrast per area, and also the asks of the area. Like you start off, I mean, in 64 you start off going to a castle, and then you go to the desert level in a 2, and then you go to the booze in a gulch, but it's still a castle, and then you go to Shy Guy's Toy Box, which is probably one of like your more like outlandish things, and then you do like Tropical Island, blah blah blah. It's all very like in the Mario universe kind of thing. It's all like fairly like rote. Like you got I mean, you don't really have the water world per se, but you all have that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Thousand Year Door, starts off normal. You've got a castle, but then you jump into this like really gorgeously created forest that's like very bright and colorful, but at the same time is not, because like the trees and everything else is all like black, gray, and white, and you only really get like this neon color from the ground. So they play with like contrast a lot.
And
And
also
then
like the
second area,
music is completely different.
yes, yeah, I think music tonally, the music for setting a mood in Thousand Year Door is a lot stronger than 64. Even if the tracks aren't necessarily memorable, they like match with their environment a lot more, or help to
Yeah.
like further what they want you to be feeling.
Like when you
Um,
go to the Peach segments, because obviously Peach got kidnapped again in this game, but they put a
yes,
very different spin on that than they
yes,
did in Paper Mario. And like that has such a different tone to it, and like that environment is so stark and different. Also, just wanted to shout out Hooktail's amazing paper design.
yeah.
Great
There's
use of fake 3D with the paper, because they again, like especially like the world powers and stuff, like they really further lean into the whole paper gimmick.
Yep, Thousand Year Door does a lot more with the actual paper gimmick, and I can't remember Sticker Star, so I'm going to skip over it. But I will say that a lot of the later games do as well, at least try to play into the paper gimmick in different and interesting ways. Um, Thousand Year Doors is a really good like building on of the 64, and the other games have a lot of other cool ways that they build on it too. But yeah, so then you jump from like castle to forest world to like modern city fight pit that like apes wrestling stuff really hard and has a
Yeah,
completely
yeah,
different aesthetic. And like it's not even a traditional dungeon. Like the first and second areas are pretty traditional, like go into dungeon, like do like work your way through it by getting keys, etc. The forest is a little different in what it asks of you, but the third area is literally just a fight pit where you have to work your way up the ranks because the champion's belt has the crystal star on it, and you need to be the champion to get it because Mario would never like steal the belt. I guess
he
it's
has
not like
to
the
earn it
princess
fair
needs
and
to save.
square. He has to play into the kayfabe.
It's not like he's on like a time, a strict timeline or anything. He's got
Yeah.
to take his time.
Also, it just
Um,
dawned on me that we haven't even gotten to the whole weird shit going on at the computer in Peach.
Plot, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting plot stuff as well. That like, I mean, they do a lot of. I want to say a lot of referential stuff, but like it's a fairly different, decent homage to like Space Odyssey 2001 with the computer.
Gaining
Uh,
sentience and coming to the conclusion that it's in love with Princess Peach
yes,
because it watched her shower.
yeah, and they do a really good job as well of characterizing the robot as a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
Um, which like I mean, it's been done a fair number of times in media, but
But like from a freaking Mario game, also
yeah,
like just that there you see like the interactivity of the stage that you're set up on,
yeah,
and how and that actually, and like we talked about it a bit earlier about how that has ramifications on gameplay in terms of dodging stage hazards, appealing to the crowd to get more power and whatnot, and to use your star powers more often.
yep. Yeah, we can go into the mechanics of that stuff in a little bit. Um, but yeah, I just think the environments are super varied. You end up, I mean, you still end up going to like tropical island, but I mean that's fine. It's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then you get to like a really gloomy town where like the whole gimmick is everybody's getting turned into pigs, and I really like the gimmick of Creepy Steeple and the gameplay idea behind it. Like, I guess we're not worried about spoiling stuff, right?
No, no, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Basically, yeah, like you go through and it feels like a really short dungeon because you beat the boss like super quickly, but the whole gimmick is that he steals your identity and you are now like seen as this like the shadow being or like nobody like recognizes you, like you don't have a name anymore
Yeah,
and you have to like gain back your identity. So I think like the hooks behind it are super interesting and I get why the level plays out like it does. I just wish they could have done a way to make it less backtracky because it's such a small area that they kind of expect you to go back and forth in. Also, this game has a whole section where they humanize one of their villains, um, which I think is another really interesting thing that we can touch on later if you want. But the whole like villain who you fight a couple of times and then like you see her constantly being berated by her colleagues or
yeah.
sisters, and then ends up joining you is like another like outside of the realm of Nintendo's usual wheelhouse
Yeah,
storytelling.
it's like a thing you might see in some RPGs, but like you not something you necessarily expect out of a Paper Mario or like a Mario game in general, like a Nintendo based property.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the game does a really good job of having very starkly different like environments and tonal shifts that 64 has, but it doesn't do as well. It's really
Mhm.
like Thousand Year Door takes everything that 64 did for the most part and one ups it or improves on it without adding too much like unneeded stuff,
Mhm.
except for the side quests.
So let's get into more of some of those specifics that you mentioned, because I think I can only keep saying, man, this game has so much personality. This game is such good writing. Because again, it does, and it's commendable, and everyone needs to play it once because of that alone. But let's get into some of these specifics that you keep mentioning.
Sure. Do you have any specific one in mind you want to go
Let's talk
over?
about the theater, because I'll roll back the footage
Okay.
a little bit here where Hooktail, like, you beat him. I love how he tries to like talk. He's like, "Don't kill me. I'll give you 1,000 coins." And you're like, like, if that's true, like, that'd be really helpful. He's like, "How about this? If you don't kill me, I'll give you a really special badge. This is the only one in the game." And you're like, You say no, and then he like hit the inner, yeah, the bottoms of my feet. That's freaking so weird. It's
Yeah,
great.
that's super out there.
Yeah. And little did, maybe they did know. Maybe like, man, this is like a whole thing.
I mean, it was a whole thing.
I mean, it is a whole thing, but like
You know,
2000, like what, 4? This game
internet
came
wasn't
out.
as big then.
Yeah, it wasn't as big then. Foot fetishes weren't as well known. But I love this. He just swoops in and eats the crowd, and it's just like this great moment of like, oh my god. So let's talk about like how like the theater mechanics work into gameplay. And do you think
Sure.
that's a positive change?
I think the theater is a super good change because it adds interaction and like more gameplay at every moment. As you've seen throughout, like the stylish moves are when you like do an action command or an A press that's like off, not necessarily off beat, but not like just for hitting the enemy. Like when you jump, you can do one right before you hit the enemy. You press A again to bounce off of them, and then you press another one when you're up in the air before you like land down on them again. So it's interesting in two regards. One, it adds like more skill based stuff where you get a reward from it, and that stylish moves give you more star power, which fills up your gauge. The other thing is that it actually helps you build like better muscle memory for action commands because the cadence that you're like tapping the A button is more like consistent. Like with the jump one, it's always like A, and like it makes, I find personally, like it makes it really easy for me to land action commands when I actually learn the stylish
Yeah.
sequences. But yeah, like the whole theater thing is like generally in both games, you once you use like a star power ability, it goes on cooldown. You have to gain it back up. In 64, it's literally just a linear increase every turn. But Thousand Year Doors is entirely based on the size of your crowd and what type of actions you're doing. There's also like parts where the crowd will like throw helpful or harmful items at you, and you have to like react to interrupt them, which is kind of interesting. And then there's like the fact that they like themed the combat itself as being a stage play. So
Yeah.
like the backgrounds and the props can like fall on you or interact with you, or the enemies, and you can like cause them to actually activate more frequently by doing certain actions, usually like hammer stuff that shakes the ground. So it adds like it's just all the little touches of like theming it around like being a stage play, having the crowd, and having the crowd like react in different ways to stuff you do that like helps build the it helps to the world building.
hmm And it's kind of a neat throwback to Mario Brothers 3.
Yeah, that too. But I think the only problem I have with the crowd is that when you get to a high enough level, they add like these ice sprayer things to the edge of the crowd,
Mm.
and that shit goes off like every other turn. And almost
Yeah.
always it will be pointed towards you, and the timing is super awkward to block it because the whole spray has to hit you, and the action command timing is right when the spray ends. And I find that like when I get to that point where my crowd is like fully upgraded to the third level, the like theater stuff starts to become more of an annoyance than like an interesting thing. I don't know
Yeah,
if you felt the same thing.
I feel like the roulette can be a bit intrusive too, because sometimes if it
Yeah.
isn't successful, it just keeps happening, and
Yep.
it's kind of like, hey, like, this is kind of getting in the way of the game.
Yeah, like it's cool when it comes up, but like half the time you get something positive, you'll already be at like full health
Yeah,
or full power
that's
points.
true. You're like, oh, I already
Um,
have all my star power.
and like yeah, and other times it's just like not impactful. So it can slow down like the pace. Yeah, I think whenever like I think the theater stuff is cool, but whenever it like literally costs you, like I had the theater stuff, like it cost me a boss fight because it froze both of my characters because I mistimed it, and then it was the third boss, Grubba in the Glitz Pit, and it was like his
Mm.
final phase where he powers himself up like 5 times, and he hit me for like a massive amount of damage in one turn. But
Mm.
like it's times like that where it's literally like a one or done scenario where it's like kind of annoying. I think overall the theater thing is super cool. I just wish that like either it was more directly controllable in terms of like where you pointed the effects, kind of thing,
Yeah, or if
or it
there are
was less.
more ways to like manipulate and play with it.
Yeah,
Like maybe being able to turn like enemies throwing stuff at you to like throwing at the bosses or particular enemies. Being
yeah,
able
because
to
like
play with it that way.
64 did do a little bit of this. Like it wasn't necessarily framed as being a stage play, but the biggest example is like in the first boss when you're fighting King Goomba. There's a big like goom nut that's hanging from a tree, and the game like tries to like imply to you that if you hit the tree instead of the enemies, it'll cause it to fall and like hit all of them. And I don't know. I feel like that was something they were experimenting with at the start of the game because you don't really see it come up much anymore in the rest of the game,
Mm-hmm.
but it's clearly something that they tried experimenting with. Maybe it was like too much of a pain in the ass to implement, or they couldn't find a system because a lot of like the Thousand Year Doors theater stuff is just like it's not randomly generated per se, but it's not set per encounter,
And
and
it's
that's
not
something that they
like
like.
core to the
Yeah,
gameplay. It's like an additive.
yeah, and then that's something they rolled with over into Thousand Year Door, um, which yeah, I think is cool. It's just another like example of like the evolution of most of the mechanics.
Yeah. Then they drop it forever.
Yeah, sad
Because
face.
this series took a different direction. Is there anything else that we should touch upon for Thousand Year Door before we get into like sort of the discussion of the series?
Um, I mean, you could talk about the Pit of Thousand, hundred, Jesus, Pit of 100 Trials, which I think is the one piece of side content they added to this game that is super interesting.
Yeah,
And
it's probably the
like,
most worthwhile piece of additional content in the whole game.
yeah, like because the base game overall is not that difficult up until like, I mean, it can be if you don't like know what to expect, I guess, or you have like a
Yeah.
really awkward build. But
Or
the
if you
final boss,
like if you don't know about certain boss gimmicks, like
yeah,
Hooktail, you like he performs worse if he hears a cricket.
yeah, totally forgot to mention that when we were talking about the theater stuff. Is that like they have Hooktail's a super good intro boss because he introduces you to crowd mechanics. What happens if you lose your crowd, and at the same time, like out side of the RPG mechanics in terms of like the badges and the effects because of the cricket sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pit of 100 Trials is interesting because Nintendo tends to want to shy away from like. I mean, it's not entirely true, but like Paper Mario games haven't had a lot of like straight up challenging content. Like 64 has Can't See Koopa, who's kind of like harder than the final boss,
Yeah.
I'd argue. Um,
I think
even though
I
they introduced way too early.
yeah. Or like the super shy guy that we talked about
Yep,
before in the toy
anti guy.
box, who's like
Yep.
the scariest thing at that point in the
Yeah,
game.
that's a solid example. But yeah, Pit of 100 Trials is like an endurance test that actually has rewards that are decent to go for. Like you, when you are ever comfortable getting to floor 50, you want to do it just for the item bag increase, which doubles your size, which is
Yeah.
super helpful. And then the final level is like definitely a much more challenging boss than the final boss of Thousand Year Door, who also like Thousand Year Door's final boss is actually pretty tough if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hard skill check at
On
the
a
end of the
first
game.
playthrough, it is probably going to be like the hardest encounter of the entire game and might feel like a difficulty spike.
Yeah, but Bonetail is definitely beyond that. Unless you can like power bounce perfectly, in which case you can trivialize the fight.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah,
Which I'm sure many people have done
yeah.
because that's just
But
the use of power bounce.
yeah, and 100 Trials is like I don't know. I think it's just it can be boring. It's pretty long, but it does a good job of like kind of being like, hey, here's like these enemies you fought in different areas, and we're gonna like remix them into here, and like you can. It allows an outlet for people who want to grind, but the game doesn't care if you grind because of the scaling star points that you talked about before.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the one good piece of kind of like extra side content that Thousand Year Door adds that doesn't like feel like a waste of your time like the side quests.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, like there's not really a lot of gameplay oriented side content, and it has that challenge reward factor that something like the Cave of Trials in Twilight Princess had, where it's like, hey, like this is just
Yep.
pure gameplay oriented challenge. This is for the hardcore people, and I do, like you mentioned, there are rewards that make it worthwhile to go through,
Yeah.
and it's definitely, I think, at least once is worth going through.
Yeah. I would say you're not done a full playthrough until you do a bit of 100 trials.
Yeah, definitely. You got to experience it at least once. So, anything else for Thousand Year Door before we touch upon why we think these two games hold up so well in comparison to I won't I Super Paper Mario, it's a whole different beast. It's way better than those other games. It's not as good as these two games, but it's still a good game.
I think Super Paper Mario has really good, fairly good narrative and writing, and
I think it keeps up the weird tone they were going for in this game, and I think it has an interesting story.
yeah, I'd argue the characterizations in Super Paper Mario are better than 64.
Yes.
Paper Mario 64, and
Yes.
I love that game a lot.
Yeah.
But it's a weaker story, as we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we basically covered all the gameplay Thousand Year Door changes. There weren't like a ton of major changes between the two, other than the partner depth.
A lot of the changes come from like just a bit of like level design, and then obviously like the writing changes are like the most overhaul. The gameplay is like super comparable, and it's so weird that Nintendo and maybe Miyamoto in particular thought it was such a sin to have the style of gameplay going forward, because ever since Thousand Year Door, more or less every single subsequent Paper Mario game, they have completely tried something new with the gameplay.
Yeah, I'd say not necessarily new, but they've tried to peel
something
back
different. They've been trying to find a new gimmick or something that will stick outside of it being a turn-based RPG. Like they've been trying to avoid everything in their power to make it an RPG.
Yes, that's fair.
Like even Super Paper Mario, for all its strengths, is more of a platform, like an action platformer, than it is RPG.
Yes.
There's RPG elements, but they're not nearly as involved as they are in these games.
There's no turn-based combat in the game, or there's not really any turn-based combat.
Yeah.
It still has RPG elements, whereas like the other games, like I would argue, don't. Because I mean, it depends on what you define as an RPG, but there's still like a leveling system, and there's still like ability choice in Super Paper Mario.
Yeah.
And past those games, there's like not really. The combat becomes something you want to avoid rather than engage in.
Yeah, like Sticker Star is like, hey, everything in this game incentivizes you just to not fight, because all your attacks are one use.
Yeah. Do you want to just jump right into it, or do you want to do an overview?
I don't think we need to go super in depth. I think this is a more general conversation about what these games, why these games, like especially now, because like the whole discourse is people screaming every time a new Paper Mario game isn't Thousand Year Door 2.
Yep.
Basically, that's basically the fan response. You get people who go, "Hey, this still looks good, but it's different." And other people are like, "Make Thousand Year Door 2, god damn it!"
I don't think we're ever getting Thousand Year Door 2.
No,
unfortunately.
We've had. I don't remember the name of the Mario and Luigi game that Paper Mario's in. Paper Jam. Oh my god, I do remember it. It's a curse.
Yeah. Paper Jam's good.
It's solid.
It's alright.
It's solid. But it's not a replacement for a Paper Mario game.
No.
And I like we've had now, counting Super Paper Mario, we've had 4 other Paper Mario games that are kind of like unrecognizable to like what this is. Especially, I think Origami King especially seems to have better writing than Color Splash and Sticker Star. Like Sticker Star is bland. It is a burnt piece of toast in terms of like personality. It's just bland, boring. It's Mario. Toads are everywhere. This is a Mario game.
Yeah.
Whereas Color Splash started to get some more flavor. And yeah, Steven from CatMax Gaming, I am back from the dead once again because I have to do that at least 4 times a year. Is come back from the dead. It's my new channel gimmick. And Origami King itself, like just from like how wacky some of the bosses are and how weird some elements are, it changes the story a bit to go back to more of a stylistic and wacky tone.
Before we continue, have you played Sticker Star, Color Splash, and Origami King?
I have never ever finished Sticker Star because it's a god awful wretched game. I think it is like the most 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 game Nintendo's ever made. For a game that's essentially like a first-party Nintendo game, it is like one of their most mediocre games. Color Splash is on a system I really don't like, and I was already burned by Sticker Star, and like the core gameplay loop of using like the cards did not appeal to me at all.
Yep.
And Origami King, I want to try at some point, but I don't want to pay full price for it.
Okay.
That's so sort of been my experience with these newer games.
Those are all totally fair. I've played through all of them, for better or worse, because I love this series.
It's a curse.
But, yeah.
So how would you rank them? Because it seems like just everyone on the internet just hates everything that's not Thousand Year Door.
I mean, I feel like it's a pretty easy stack rank. I mean, Thousand Year Door is probably top. Paper Mario, Super Paper Mario, Origami King, Color Splash, Sticker Star is like off the bottom of the charts.
So it goes, so like there's a bit of a weird order going on for the first 3, and then everything else is just backwards.
Yeah, I mean, it has, after Sticker Star literally like trash canned the game. Like, it jumped off a cliff, landed in a dumpster, lit the dumpster on fire itself, rolled the dumpster down a hill, and buried it under a pile of garbage. And slowly, the series has been trying to crawl out of that
it's like that
pile.
scene in Detroit 2 Human.
Yeah.
Where he's climbing out of the garbage pit and there's like all the hands dragging him down. That's Paper Mario. But he's I don't know if he's fully out of there yet. Maybe no. Origami King.
No.
No?
No. I mean, I can talk about Origami King later if you want.
I mean, you can talk about it now. You can go any way. I have no particular structure for this conversation.
Sure. Okay. So
and I'm not an expert in these other games, so I am open to hearing anything.
Let's go through them then. So we got Thousand Year Door, which is a great turn-based RPG with good world building.
A couple pacing issues, but otherwise a really strong game.
It's easily like a 9.5 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, depending on how often you give out 10 out of 10s.
Sure.
So you go to Super Paper Mario. You still have a lot of the good world building. There's still a lot of original, unique characters. You actually get to play as Peach and a bunch of other characters.
Like you play as Bowser, which I really liked back in the day.
Yep. There's like still a decent amount of RPG-ness in like there are different partners. They're not as cool because they're like these weird pixel like characters that are mostly like shaped colored sprites. It still has like a paper gimmick where you can change like dimensions from like 2D to 3D and other stuff like that. And it's an entirely unique world as well, so it still has a lot of the cool shit that Thousand Year Door did. But the main thing they did was they took out turn-based battles. So it's like a traditional Mario side-scrolling platformer, but it's not always just left to right. There's like certain like areas that are kind of like hub areas. There's one part really early on where like you're trapped in this mansion and you have to like solve these puzzles to get out.
You need to get rupees.
Yes, you remember.
Yeah, I do. I remember that because I remember that was like the point where I rented the game and I stopped there because I was like, "This is taking forever."
Yeah, so there's still, I think, a lot of cool, unique ideas, but it was clear that Paper Mario for them was at least becoming somewhere where they experimented more, and most people believe, and I think, I don't know if Nintendo's 100% confirmed it, that because the Mario and Luigi series was a hardcore, like, it's our RPG, that they wanted Paper Mario to fill its own, like, niche, even though they're very different RPGs.
Yeah.
There's totally room for 2 RPGs.
Yeah, but they thought, we cannot have 2 Mario RPG series. This is ludicrous. Yeah. This is insanity. And
So
then somewhere Final Fantasy just laughs with all of its RPG spin-offs that are just all RPGs.
yeah, so Super Paper Mario still has like an experience system because you gain points by defeating enemies. So there's still a reason to engage in combat and boss fights and etc. So then they go to Sticker Star 5 years later, and something has clearly gone horribly wrong.
I also
Uh,
want to preface saying when they initially revealed Sticker Star, everyone was on board. Everyone
yeah,
was so excited because it had this beautiful, like brought up to modern standards art style. It was a return to the classic action-based turn-based system that everyone liked in the original game. So everyone like going into it was pretty excited.
yep,
A couple people were like, "Hey, how come in all the trailers we're only seeing Mario?" And then lo and
yeah.
behold, we get the game. Leveling is just whack in that game. There's no party members. Everyone's a generic Mario person. Like they're just a generic character from Mario. And oh my god, the freaking combat. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
So, yeah, there's basically like no abilities. Everything is governed by stickers that are like I can't remember in that game if they're single use or multi use or
I
whatever.
think some
Basically,
might become multi-use, but
yeah.
initially everything's single use, and you either pay money for these, or you find them in the environment or off of
You find
enemies.
so many in the environment and off of forced combat that you almost never need to buy it. Like there's no real power curve to the game because the enemies get stronger at the same rate that you get new, more powerful versions of jump and hammer. And because there's no partners, there's no like unique moves. And then the other big issue in combat is that instead of boss fights being something where you figure out the boss's mechanic and you play around it or you find what ability is useful, there's literally just win buttons for every boss. Because the other thing that this game has is like real world items like fans and scissors and
Yes. Yes.
staplers. And if you know what works against a boss, you can basically just use it at the right time and you insta win the fight. And so there's no real progression of skill because there's also no timing in the combat, as we discussed before. Like basically, we discussed before the two different axes of like player improvement in the game. One is learning how to do action commands better, and the other is learning like is increasing your build and your combat skills. This game basically has neither because you don't really get improved abilities because enemies scale at the same rate that you do, and you don't really get new different ways to attack. It's just you hammer, but you hammer harder. And the bosses and like there's no timing of action commands, and the boss fights themselves don't actually have mechanics to learn that you are skill based. It's just you learn when to do a thing. So in all aspects, I don't even think it's an RPG, to be honest.
It's not. It's like just some weird adventure game.
Yeah,
And it's so painfully linear, and there's just like nothing interesting to do to it. Like when I say it is the most mediocre game I think I've ever played, that's like a competently well-made, not broken game. It's just mediocre.
you also just reminded me by saying linear. Also, we talked before a bunch about how you use abilities in the overworld and how, like both Mario and his partners, this game doesn't technically have an overworld or a connected world because it plays out on a traditional Mario like world 1-1 board
Yeah.
where you pick a level and then you play the level. And there's minor replayability in the level in terms of like optional objectives, but everything is like self-contained. There's no real backtracking that I can remember. There might be some. But yeah, there's no real backtracking that I can remember. All of the world building is gone. You're in Generico, Mushroom Kingdom. All the characters are like basic Goombas, Koopas, etc. They have
Is
Dory in it.
Bowser the final boss in that?
I honestly don't even remember.
I don't remember. I feel
I
like
don't think so because I think all the bosses are like weird real world shit.
yeah, they're all like weird. Like this is a thing. This is an eraser.
I'll look it up though.
It erases
But
paper.
I know Bowser Jr. is in it. Like the only character you have in it that's original or a partner, quote unquote, is like the weird crown thing that follows you along. Because like basically after Super Paper Mario, the games have like consisted of being like, this is the gimmick for this game. This is the gimmick companion who
From the
provides
Gimmick
the
Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, Sticker Star has the crown thing and stickers. Color Splash has the bucket thing
Because it's
and
paint. And
colors.
color
Origami
paint.
King has the origami character and the origami. Like they're all like a gimmick paired with gimmick character.
Yeah. Whereas like Thousand Year Door, especially, is like anything but that.
Yeah, like I think Nintendo tends to have a really big fear of releasing something that is the same thing, even if it's better. And like, I get from a designer standpoint, they were probably like, Thousand Year Door is a great game. I don't even think of what I could change about this battle system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reinvent the wheel because
Yeah.
you found something that works. Um, so yeah, that's Sticker Story.
And Sticker Star, it reviewed decent. Like critics weren't that harsh on it. It was definitely more of the fan base that was harsh on it. And
Yeah,
so Color Splash, I remember when they showed off Color Splash, I myself was like, "Oh my god, it looks so pretty." Like the art, like, because that was the first Paper Mario game that was developed for high definition, and I remember being like, "Oh man, like this game looks really sharp. That's really appealing." And then I saw the gameplay trailer and was like, "Oh my god, I have no interest in this."
yeah.
Which is
Also,
entirely like puzzle oriented, right?
um, Color Splash isn't puzzle oriented, really. That's Origami King
Okay,
more
because
so.
it has the weird card system.
Yes, Color Splash is like you fill in the cards with color, but it's still basically the same as Sticker Stars combat in terms of like you pick a card, you use the card like has either limited uses or one use kind of thing. Unless I'm like completely forgetting something about Color Splash. I've only played past Super Paper Mario. I've only played each of them once,
Hmm.
but I did push my way through them. But also, you are right. Another big problem with Sticker Star, just to quickly go back, is that they basically reverted to the normal ass Mario versus Bowser storyline
Mm-hmm.
because Bowser's the final boss.
I almost feel like in any Mario spin-off, because of Bowser's inside story, they've like ruined having that conflict again. Because that game kind of pokes so much fun at how trite their conflict is.
Yeah.
And it just feels so boring to go back to that in any other game.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, Color Splash is also Bowser, but it's a bit different because
He has
Bowser is
paint
like
on him.
corrupted, yeah, because of the paint. Like Color Splash does a lot better for the world. I think the environments in Color Splash are a lot more interesting. I think the gimmick is a lot more well done because there is an overworld to interact with the gimmick. Whereas Sticker Star just had the gimmick was part of the combat loop. Color Splash tries to spread the gimmick out to a lot more areas. I think the game looks beautiful, like you said.
Yeah, like
I think the
it's
environments are interesting. They make a tiny step forward on characters so that, like, sometimes the Toads have ascots.
yeah, that's the
Sometimes
thing. That's the thing with
the
that game is
Toads,
that everyone's a toad.
yeah, sometimes the Toads have roles or jobs or different like colors, and there's a couple, like five, I think, unique Toads. Um, but it's still an action adventure game because like combat rewards you with nothing but like coins and paint, but you wouldn't have needed the paint in the first place if like you just not gone into combat or like you barely need any paint to like interact with the environment stuff that you need the paint for.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
so it's
its core issue is that it improves upon what Sticker Star changed, but it's still kind of working from a base that isn't fully thought or fleshed out.
yeah, like they had a core idea where like paint is what determines your resource, and so like you have this card. I'm starting to remember now. So you have a card you use
It's
in
all coming
combat.
back to me.
Yeah,
The paint.
so yeah, you choose a card to use in combat, and then paint is your resource. So you choose how strong you want that card to be based on how much you paint it. Um, so there is like supposed to be an idea of resource management in the game, but the problem is that the loop they're asking you to do doesn't actually net you anything positive. So
Mm-hmm.
like, why bother going into this fight and then using paint to like beat an enemy before they can hurt me when the reward for the fight
It's more
will be
paint.
paint and coins when I could just not go into the fight in the first place and not spend the paint.
Yeah.
Like if Color Splash had just like one thing that made like battles worth it. And like there's really not a lot of progression in that game either. Like there's no badges, there's no partners, there's no like real big progression other than I think like you slowly level up and get like more HP. But like there's no reason to go into combat, so it doesn't really matter. Like if they'd I think they were close if they'd, actually done some sort of combat where the
Mm-hmm.
stakes mattered.
Yeah.
Um yeah, and then rolling into that, you get into Origami King, which
Which I
has
know
the
the
same
least
core
about.
problems.
Admittedly, I know the least about this game because this was another thing of I was so done
Yeah,
after Sticker Star and Color Splash that I saw it and said, "Hey, this looks really good. Hey, the characters look way more unique." But I've been burned twice, and I don't want to like get excited and get burned again.
yeah. So yeah, Color Splash still has all the same problems as well. Like it's got
It's better,
there's
but
no
it still has the core issues of
yeah,
Sticker
there's no
Star.
real backtracking. The bosses are still like not really strategy based. Um, the characterization of stuff is a bit better. The story's a bit better. The environments are a bit better. There's a better kernel of an idea, but it's the same thing. So then you roll into Origami King, and everybody's seeing all this new stuff, and you go, "Oh my god, there's actual like turn-based combat. It's super different and interesting, but it is turn-based combat, and there are partners in these trailers. They're very generic partners because it's just a normal ass bomb that isn't like a different color, and it doesn't have any like clothing or accents. But at least there's partners.
I mean,
So people get their hopes up.
isn't there a funny joke about how like he has to kill himself and he like does this dramatic goodbye and then he just respawns?
No, there's a. I mean, it's he literally kills himself in that game. I don't know if you want
That's
to avoid spoilers.
no,
but
no.
he
We're going into
literally
full.
blows
Go
up
as
a
much as you
boulder.
want.
He blows up a boulder to save your gimmick partner, the origami girl, and he's fucking dead. And his ghost talks to you.
So I can
It's
appreciate
actually
like that.
super jarring.
Yeah, I like. Isn't there a lot? Isn't there multiple points like that in that game, or is that the only one?
No, it's really just that one
Oh,
point.
okay. I was about to
Every
give
other-
it
Yeah.
credit.
Every other partner you get is like a temporary partner who joins you for an area, and then like just like screws off after that one area. Yeah. So Origami King. I mean, I can give you a full overview because I rode the emotional roller coaster like everybody else. It gets announced. You see all this stuff. A lot of people get their hopes up because they're like, "Oh my god, it's getting even closer to Thousand Year Door."
And it's HD still, and it still looks good.
Yeah, I didn't get my hopes up that much because I don't trust Nintendo to do that. I've been burned one too many times, as they say. But yeah, so they show that, but everybody's like, oh, I don't see an experience. There's no experience. Maybe they'll show it later. They
I
show another trailer.
remember people picking apart that gameplay trailer piece by piece, trying to see if they should be excited, and everyone's
they
like,
were
"There's
like-
no reward, there's no EXP." And people were like, "Calm the fuck down, wait for them to like show more." And then there's like it just became like a room of people screaming at each other, being like, "Give them a chance." Everyone's like, "No."
Yeah, because they never actually showed like the end of a battle rolling into like what happened next. People were like there could still be a screen.
Does that almost suggest to you that they're aware that people are like a bit miffed
Probably.
about that?
Yeah. But yeah, they like kind of like skirted around the issue. You could see that there were like there were not just toads, but there weren't exactly like unique characters in the story. You could see that it wasn't a world map where you picked levels anymore. It was clearly like an interconnected world. So like they made these slow steps forward. But then when you get into the game, it still has a lot of the core problems the previous games do, which is the main one that we've talked about over and over, in that there is no reason to go into battles, really.
You know,
You get coins from battles, but you don't need to spend the coins if you didn't do it in the first place.
you think by the time they did this for the third time, they would have really like had a solution for this.
I mean, I don't think they're trying to find one is the problem.
Ugh.
I think they think that the rest of the game, in terms of the world exploration and stuff, is compelling enough that people don't need a reason to loop in. Like, I'd honestly rather... That's not true. I was going to say I'd honestly rather the games didn't have battles at this point, but that's not exactly true. So they did at least add depth to the battle system. It's not based on a resource economy that's super stupid. The like turning of the grid and lining stuff up is cool and interesting at first. And that's the key word, at first. Because once you're forced to do it over and over, the fact that they basically don't... So, like, for those who don't know, the way you play Origami King is everybody's on, like, this rotating, like, circular disc. And so when you go into combat, the enemies will be lined up in, like, a group. And the hammer will hit in a 2x2 square, and the jump will be, like, a 4 straight line. So you want to either line up enemies in a line so you can jump on all of them, or line them up clumped up so you can hit them all with your hammer. So the game starts out basically like that, and you'll go in and the enemies will be like in a certain orientation, and then you're able to rotate the like different. There's like 4 different um, circles, I guess, that you can rotate to line things up, and you can also slide the different sections to move from like one side of the circle to the other. This is a horrible explanation. Just literally like Google it and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But basically, it's a puzzle-based like combat system that you have a certain amount of time to line up enemies, and then you go into like the action phase where you actually have to time your attacks. So they did
Oh
bring that back.
my god.
Yeah, so they did bring that back. So you actually have to time stuff to do more damage. The problem is that they have this really cool core idea, and then they never add any depth to it.
Hmm.
So you will start the game by having to rotate enemies and slide them to align them, and you will end the game doing the exact same stuff. There is no growth in player skill, really, in the basic combat, or combat ability, because Mario doesn't gain anything but more health. You don't gain any other abilities. The only time they do it like once or twice, like there's one cool time where they introduce boos, and the boos will go invisible, so you have to remember where they were before they got rotated out.
Okay.
So that like adds a little bit of a twist on the puzzle. And there's like a couple. I can't remember an exact example, but there's like I'm sure one other example of an enemy that like screws with your rotation bit, because there is still like jump and hammer, so you have to have like enemies aligned to jump on that you can jump on that don't have like spiky heads.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of problem. They get a really interesting core idea, but then there's no reason to really do combat because you don't get anything out of it, and they don't expand on the core idea throughout the game in terms of your player's growth or player skill growth. That was a lot of words.
Just tell me this, Kevin. Is Bowser the final boss?
No.
Oh, thank God. Is it the
so
Origami
Bowser,
King?
another good thing in the game actually is Bowser resumes his role kind of a comedic foil like in Thousand Year Door.
Mhm.
He is a side character who you rescue at the beginning of the game, and then he is actually kidnapped by the villain for the rest of the game, but you get help from his minions who want to get him back because they like Bowser.
Mhm.
So you run into like Kamek, and you run into Bowser Jr., and you run into other like Bowser villains, because the main difference in this game is that if somebody is a normal paper person, most of the time they're like cordial and nice to you, and the ones who have been folded up to look like origami are the actual villains.
Mm.
So like once again, like it plays into its gimmick really well. And the origami thing is really interesting in the way you interact with because there is environmental interaction, and like you kind of learn new ways to interact with the environment, but not really.
Mhm.
So they add like a couple of those things back. Like they give you the carrot, and they're holding it in front of you, and there's actually a carrot on the stick this time, and not just like an illusory
They're
carrot.
not just holding a stick and threatening to like just take it away from you or hit you with it.
Yeah, but they don't let you get that carrot ever. And so then the partners that they showed off in the trailer. So you get these partners in different areas, and if you go into combat, the partners will occasionally do something, but you have no control over them.
Mm.
They will randomly at times determine to help you in combat by doing like random one-off combat attacks, and they generally just usually have a like plot hook as to why they're there. So the Babama joins you because he has like amnesia, and he's like by himself on a gondola, and he's like, I need somebody to show me where to go. But you don't really use him at all, like in the overworld, to blow anything up, except for in like the cutscene where he blows himself up. Because I guess bombs in this world can only blow up once.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy of their life.
Yeah, and then you have like the archaeology toad, who actually does have an overworld ability where when you have him with you, you can like dig up stuff that you detect in the world. But like otherwise, like he doesn't receive any characterization past that, because as soon as you're done that chapter, he just stays in the desert. And they don't even like conclude his story arc. It's just like, oh, you did this thing, and he found like the tomb he was trying to find, and then you just like leave the area and he doesn't follow you.
Mm. Mm.
And so yeah, they have that with a couple of the other characters. Like Bowser Jr. is a partner in the game, in like one of the later.
That's
chapters.
a little interesting.
Yeah, and you've got his whole like thing where you're trying to like, because he gets like the shit kicked out of him, and you have to like take him to these different hot springs to like uncrease him and like restore his color and stuff. Like a lot of the plot hooks and the ideas and the writing and the world are fine and interesting and good and varied that we like in Thousand Year Door.
But we
It's
keep
just
coming
that,
back to the circle of the
yeah,
gameplay.
it's like the paint job on both of them are really good, but if I go up and look at Thousand Year Door, I'm like, wow, the architecture that like is allowing me to see all of this like color and whatever is really well done. But if you walk up and look at like any of Color Splash or Sticker Store or Origami King's like structure, you might like walk up to it and then try to walk beside it and realize it's a flat 2D like presentation. There's no the bones underneath it are not there, or they're not
This
good.
doesn't look too stable. I don't know if they could
Yeah,
base an entire combat system off of this one.
yeah. Like if they made an Origami King 2 and there was a reason to do combat and they actually added twists onto it,
And
I would.
progression.
Yeah, I would, and I mean preferably, partners and whatever. But I mean, how much can we ask for, really? One thing at
I
a
don't
time.
know. Apparently we're slowly working at this one step at a time.
Basically, we're slowly adding things back from Thousand Year Door that people liked.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think Nintendo cares about. Like, I honestly don't even know like sales numbers on these games and if they've done better or worse after Thousand Year Door. Like, I don't know if.
I would have to assume Origami King did better than Color Splash just because of the audience size of the Switch
Yeah,
versus Wii U, but I don't have anything to base that off of. That's just
but
my
I don't know. Like,
intuition.
who knows if like Thousand Year Door, like because the average Nintendo fan might have been a younger age or something. Like, I'm sure lots of people bounced off of it because it is a fairly complex RPG, and like, not to like, I'm not trying to like play devil's advocate, but like, unfortunately, in the world of like games and business and whatnot, like Nintendo obviously does trend to having a younger audience.
Despite their core audience being between like the ages of like 18 and 36,
Yes.
Nintendo always makes their games as accessible as they can to appeal to children and to have that going for their games while still having enough nuance or, design quality so that an older audience can appreciate it.
Yeah, because I think they know that their core audience, they have a very unique demographic that they can cater to that other console sellers or other publishers don't really have the opportunity to do. So Nintendo does try to make their stuff as like accessible and as wide-reaching as possible, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have like a narrow audience or design goal, you tend to water down a lot of your surrounding mechanics, which is basically what we've been talking about. And they've slowly been adding stuff back, and hopefully, as they add this stuff back, their sales numbers don't dip, and they realize that people aren't as stupid as they might take them for.
I think the best way they could really test the waters with this is if they just re-release these games and just maybe saw if there was interest in that or see how it's received. It'd be a nice little easy teaser.
I think that it's okay, but there's really flawed examples of that. I think a really perfect example is Capcom's re-releases of Third Strike and Darkstalkers, which actually commercially did not do very well, even though they are great remasters, or re-releases, I should say, that like added online play to games that didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, personally, because of the like, really because Dolphin is available, I would only buy a Thousand Year Door remake
I'm just saying like even like a $20 port, like something like that.
No, I know.
Like not
I
even a
think
full on.
the problem as well is that Nintendo doesn't have a history, especially with the recent 30th re-release, of having, first off, well-priced ports for what they.
You're right. They're gonna do the Paper Mario collection. It will be Paper Mario 64, Thousand Year Door, Super Paper Mario, and it will be available to buy physically and digitally for like 2 months. Then it's gone forever.
Yeah, they don't have a really good history with re-releases, and they seem super hesitant to do it because they want people to focus. I mean, there's a whole other discussion we could go into about the current stuff with Melee. I'm not going to go into any of that because nobody wants to hear that. But they have a very large tendency to avoid re-releasing old stuff because they want people to focus on their current offerings. And like even with the examples of like their current like Virtual Console basically doesn't exist on Switch.
Yeah, like, it's a very much a shell of what it was like on the Wii.
Your footage is gone.
I know. It's because it's about to loop.
Cool.
So I'm just adding some variety. I'm gonna go show some
Go
more.
back to 64.
Yeah, some 64. I'm gonna try show off the more of the boss fight with the
Yep.
Koopa Bros.
But yeah, I think Nintendo has a really big hesitance. They seem scared of their past, honestly, in a
Which
way.
is weird because they're one of the most storied and celebrated game companies and developers and publishers in the industry. Like they're so storied and respected, and it's so weird that they're so hesitant and fearful to go to their past library.
Yeah. So one other thing I will touch on before we completely move off of Origami King is boss fights, because we've talked about how in Sticker Star and Color Splash, the boss fights are basically like generic, like use this one item, one thing, you solve the whole fight.
To fight this real world thing.
Yes. So Origami King is interesting because a lot of the bosses are real world things, like a pencil case or a thing of tape. But they try to make it unique by having. So this is the only time where they actually mess with the core combat system. And they mess with it in two ways. In one way, in that like you're basically constructing, whereas before in normal combat you're trying to line up enemies to hit. In the boss fights, you're lining up like arrows and action commands on the map that Mario will walk over to allow him to attack the boss. And it's actually super cool in a base level, and kind of what I wish the entire combat system was built on. And so bosses will add really interesting twists based on what type of real world item they are. Like the tape guy will like tape down parts of the like rotating circular, I don't even know what to call it. I want to call it a grid. But like, so basically you have to align your path so that you don't walk over the tape. Because if you walk over the tape, Mario will stop moving and he won't get to your destination that you've tried to align for him. And there's like an action economy of like, you have to activate these different panels by going to another panel first so that you can do like the more powerful attack. However, what ends up becoming a problem is it has the same problem of there is one I mean, it's not entirely true. There is not necessarily one way to beat the boss. You can beat all the bosses by slowly chipping them down. But if you don't beat the boss the way they want you to, using the boss gimmick, the fight takes so much longer. So basically it'll be like, you've got to hit the pencil case from this angle to pop it open, and then you have to activate the special attack where you get giant accordion hands and you smash the pencil case lid closed. And so it starts off really simple and really obvious, and by the time you get to like the last boss, it becomes super convoluted as to when you're supposed to use these special abilities without, like, for a first-time player, like, it just did not feel intuitive to me. And they kind of like have run out of their creative space for how to mix up these encounters.
It sounds like they've limited themselves to such a point, like with how they've developed a lot of these battle systems, that they really need to, if they're trying to like just for whatever reason strictly avoid the action command turn-based system, they at least need to come up with a system that enables them more flexibility and to build stuff up upon, rather it being like the same experience all the way through to the point where they just like limit themselves to a point where they can't do anything with it.
Yeah, like I think the bosses are the highlight of Origami King at first, but they become really frustrating later on because you basically want to like restart the fight once you learn the gimmick to do it properly, because half the fight is learning when to apply the gimmick at the right time, and then like at that point you've lost like a bunch of your health from unavoidable damage. Because the other big thing about Thousand Year Door a lot of the time is if you do proper action commands, you can limit the amount of damage you take.
Yeah.
The damage numbers in Origami King are huge. You're taking like 16 damage hits at times, and like, wow, I can action command to reduce that by 1. So, or like even like having it is still a bunch of damage. Like it's very much like a figure out the gimmick. Once you know the gimmick, you just win the fight kind of thing. And it falls into that same pattern that Sticker Star and Color Splash have of like, here's the one big gimmick, learn the gimmick, beat the boss. And it doesn't so much feel like a expression of skill anymore as much as it is like a, you've solved the puzzle, you can do it. Which I guess, you know, the whole game's combat is kind of puzzle based. I just wish there was like more turn to turn and minute to minute curveballs where like my basic mechanics are what I'm using to beat the boss instead of the gimmick, but the gimmick is more heavily applied on how I apply those basic mechanics to the boss.
At the end of the day, because like I do not feel Sticker Star is worth playing at all unless you're just unless you're like some sort of historian and you're like, I need to know about every Paper Mario game. even then I'm like, really? You could just there's so many better ways to spend your time. But it to me in my mind, like I have no interest in revisiting Color Splash or looking at it, but is Origami King, cuz a lot of the stuff you're talking about, obviously, like you've discussed the caveats in detail and you've mentioned like what works, what doesn't. But it sounds like such a still not a full course correction, but generally it sounds they're on a better track there.
Yeah.
Is it worth playing, or is it still like really? Are you still really hesitant to recommend it?
I would say, like, because of the world and like a lot of the writing is really good and the interactions and stuff and like the environments are like amazing, super beautiful, pretty varied as well in this game. I'd say it's probably worth it, but personally, I got very frustrated at the bosses, so I would honestly just look up what the gimmick of the boss is and when to use it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're somebody who enjoys that full-on puzzle solving and you don't mind like getting your ass beat as you try to figure out like the game's really cryptic hints as to how to use the abilities it has, and maybe I'm just old now and I don't realize how to use it, but like I found that the hints they gave were hella cryptic and it was not like inherently obvious to me when to use the gimmick to beat the boss. So like I would say it's probably worth a playthrough, but if you're like me and time is more important to you these days than anything else, I would save yourself some time and just look up like how to beat the boss, or be prepared to just like fight the boss and like literally just die on the first run through until you learn how to do it.
Mm.
And also just avoid combat because you'll get bored of it. But I think the world, the characters are better,
Mm-hmm.
and the environments are interesting enough that it's probably worth a playthrough. Probably not at full price either.
All right. I appreciate that because that's something I can work with maybe one day, and hopefully one day we regain the lofty heights of these first two games. Also,
Yes.
I don't know why that alert popped up. I don't even have GOG Galaxy open. That's interesting.
But yeah, if you have never played a Paper Mario game and you're interested in playing them, I'd honestly almost suggest you play Origami King first, so that at least you can only go up from there. Because if you try to play them in succession and you go like 64, which is fun to play, great experience, you go to 1,000 Year Door, you appreciate
You're like,
all
oh
the
wow,
improvements
this
they
is
made,
like that other game, but like in
yeah.
these areas, it's even better.
And then you try to go to Origami King, you'll probably have a worse experience. Whereas, like, for somebody like me who played through them all, and their last experience was Color Splash, and then you go into Origami King, then you're like, man, it can, you can appreciate. Like, I literally played Origami King, and then when Darren talked about doing this, I played 64 and 1,000 Year Door, and it gave me a good retrospective, like, all the things that it's still missing.
Yeah.
But yeah. Or you could just straight up skip Origami King if you aren't interested in buying another game or playing it on Switch if you don't have a Switch or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, if only. I'm just thinking of what would be. But I think that's pretty extensive. Thank you so much for your insights on the later games, because you did what many of us couldn't and suffered through them. Maybe Origami King to a lesser extent, but overall I appreciate that because that gives me a bit more insight into what does and doesn't work, and I think you helped add a lot to this episode, especially for those listening to maybe appreciate more about what these first two games do right. And what makes this series at its core tick. And so I think that's pretty much it. Kevin, is there anything you want to shout out or speak to before we conclude here? Doesn't have to be your own projects. Can be anything.
No, I was going to quickly touch on the parallel Paper Mario in the Mario and Luigi series, which are also great games. Obviously, we're not going to discuss them here. But the whole purported reason why Paper Mario, stopped being as much of an RPG, which we touched on, is the Mario and Luigi series. And I'm hoping that because that series seems to have like died.
Well, I mean, the developer's just gone.
Yeah, Alpha Dream's like bankrupt, right?
I think they dissolved.
How did they go bankrupt with those games?
I don't know, because they're like backed by Nintendo, so I think it's because the 3DS remakes did so terribly that
Yeah, and this
that
is
was the
another
problem.
like not to like harp on that point, but this is another reason why remakes cannot be used to judge quality of games.
Yeah.
I didn't buy the remakes of the Mario and Luigi games because I played Superstar Saga like literally 5 times in a row, and it just wasn't worth it
Yeah.
to me to like buy a game I've played a bunch of times, even with the couple of things they added. All the Mario and Luigi games are great games. They slowly decline in quality, but I'm hoping then that if this series is dead, that Paper Mario can go back to filling the role it used to have,
Hmm.
because
That
I
excuse of not having two RPG
yeah,
series is no longer present.
I overall like the aesthetics and the characterization more in Paper Mario. It's just so unique. It's so colorful. It's so interesting. The Mario and Luigi games are great, unique, interesting. They just don't have the same like aesthetic. Is really
Hmm.
what it comes down to.
It's like a style thing.
Yeah,
Like,
and I wish we could
they
have
have
both
their
of them.
own distinct style, and I agree that there is room for both. Obviously, Nintendo, doesn't think that, but that's a shame because I think there definitely was a place. But if I had to choose between the two, I think the Paper Mario one is more worth preserving.
Yeah, and I wish we could still have both series, but
Yeah,
if we can't, I would rather Paper Mario became an RPG that we can play again.
like
Also, if you've never,
yeah,
no, keep going.
obviously if you never played either, like you need to. But I was gonna
Yes.
say if I could live in a timeline where I could get Thousand Year Door 2 and Bowser's Inside Story 2, that's a good timeline.
And also, since we didn't touch on it, if you have the means or are interested, it's a little more of a barrier of entry. But Super Mario RPG is a still great game that sets a lot of the foundation for Mario 64, and is definitely worth playing even
And it's
today.
available on, I think, almost every other virtual console service except the current one.
Yeah, yeah, you can get it. You can get it on. Or I mean, if you want, you can get the SNES Mini, and then you can use the feature that lets you reverse time, so you can do perfect power bounces and beat all the bosses in one turn.
There you go.
The originator of the power bounce, and it is very broken in that game.
Mm-hmm. Well,
But yeah,
I mean, I think that about that does it for us. Thank you for those of you who joined us live on Twitch and watched, and those of you who are watching this later on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in and watching it. Apologies for the delay for this episode. I was a bit more than I could chew, and I also had some other stuff IRL that delayed this between the Metal Gear Solid 2 episode and this one. For the next one, we're going to be looking at Metal Gear Solid 3, and after that, I do not yet have the next game chosen yet. So if you have suggestions or input into titles you would like to see covered in this, please let me know in the comments or on Twitter. And otherwise, thanks you so much, Kevin, for all your insight into this wonderful, wacky series that hopefully one day will return to its heights.
thank you for having me.
All right. And yeah, thanks again everyone for watching. This is the end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned some things you did not know before about Paper Mario. Otherwise, see you guys around next time.